The fork was already halfway to his mouth when I slapped it out of his hand, and the whole rooftop just froze. That was the night a homeless girl in a ripped hoodie told a billionaire not to eat his dinner, and actually meant it. If I had kept my mouth shut like I usually did, he would have been dead by dessert, and I would have gone back to digging through trash like nothing happened. You know what I mean? I grew up learning that kids like me are supposed to be invisible. You stay in the shadows, you move along the walls, you keep your head down so security guards and cops and bored rich people don't decide you're the problem of the day, because the second they really see you, your night usually gets worse. That evening, I was exactly where a girl like me was expected to be, behind the fancy restaurant, not in it, standing by the dumpsters that smell like old wine and rotten lettuce, hoping some half-eaten burger or still good fries had been tossed out because somebody got full or went on a diet mid-meal, whatever their loss, my dinner. I had one arm deep in a trash bag when I heard my name for the first time in hours. Not my real name, just, "Hey, kid," yelled by the busboy, taking a smoke break, telling me to hurry up before the manager saw me. Same old, same routine, and then over the clatter of dishes and the hum of the kitchen, I heard a very different name, the kind you only hear on the news or in those business articles people read on their phones. Nolan Cross. One man said, calm like he was ordering a drink, "By the end of dinner he won't be a problem anymore." And his friend snorted and said something like, "For what he's paying us, he better not be." I went very, very still, hand still inside a greasy paper bag, and edged closer to the back door, because as much as my survival instincts told me to mind my own business, the tone in that guy's voice glued my feet to the concrete. Through the crack in the service door, I saw the back of a server, white shirt, black vest, one expensive-looking salad under a heat lamp just sitting there all pretty, and standing just off to the side was this man in a black suit who definitely did not belong in the kitchen, holding a tiny glass vial, the way some people hold a pen, casual like he'd done this 100 times. I watched him tilt it, pour a few drops onto the stupid fancy greens, then tap the rim of the plate with his knuckle like he was signing his work before he slid back into the shadows. I might not know the name of every chemical in the world, but I've watched rats twitch and die behind grocery stores after they chewed the wrong pellet. I know what poison looks like. It has a feel to it, a wrongness in your gut that says, if you don't do something right now, someone is going to die. I wish I could tell you I was brave from the start, but the first thought that hit me was, this is not my problem. They won't believe you anyway. Just go back to the dumpster. Because that's how life trains you. When everybody assumes you're lying, you're dirty, you're trying to hustle them for a few bucks. I even turned away for a second, hand shaking over some cold fries, and then I heard the guy say Nolan's name again, and I pictured some stranger in a perfect suit taking one bite and just crumpling forward while everyone screamed too late, and something in my chest snapped. Like, if I walk away from this, what am I, just a shadow with a heartbeat? So I did the stupid thing, the kind of thing that gets kids like me arrested or worse. I slipped through that service door while the cook was yelling at someone, followed the server with the plate into the elevator, and then took the stairs as fast as my lungs would let me, 16 floors up, hand on the rail, knees burning, heart pounding so loud it drowned out my thoughts, telling myself at every landing, this is insane, you're insane, but if you don't make it, that guy dies. When I finally shoved open the heavy door to the rooftop all at once, I was standing in this world that wasn't built for me. String lights, live music, people dressed like magazine covers, city lights stretching out behind them, like someone put a painting around their table. And right at the center of it, at the nicest table with the best view, was Nolan Cross himself, silver hair, black tux, the kind of face you've seen 100 times on screens, but never in real life, with waiters hovering around him, like planets around a sun. The server put the salad down in front of him, some colorful little work of art, and he reached for his fork without even looking at it, Because when you live that high up, you just assume the world won't dare hurt you. I don't even remember crossing the space between us. I just remember the sound, that sharp metal on china clatter, when I hit his hand hard enough to knock the fork right out of it, and then the silence that fell like somebody hit pause on the whole rooftop. Security surged toward me, guests gasped. Somebody laughed in that ugly way. People laugh when they're uncomfortable, and Nolan looked up at me with this cold, controlled expression like, "Who let this stray anywhere near my table?" I grabbed the back of his chair to keep the guard from yanking me backward, and I said louder than I meant to, "Do not eat that something is wrong with your food." The head waiter came rushing over, apologizing to him, scolding me, threatening to call the police. People were whispering about crazy street kids and where is management. But Nolan raised his hand just a little, and everybody actually stopped talking for a second, which I still can't believe. "You have 10 seconds, he said, voice low, eyes sharp, "to tell me why you're touching my plate." My throat was so dry I could barely swallow, but I made myself look at him, not at the guard's hand on my shoulder, and I said, "Because I watched a man pour something on it. Downstairs in the kitchen, he had a vial. He said your name. They said you wouldn't make it past dessert." The word poison wanted to come out, but I swallowed it, like maybe if I didn't say it, they'd take me a little more seriously, which sounds ridiculous now. The temperature on that rooftop dropped 10 degrees in one heartbeat, I swear. And Nolan's eyes flicked past me, not moving his head, just his gaze toward the far side of the terrace, where of course the man in the black suit was sitting alone with an untouched drink watching us, like this was a show he'd paid good money for. "You should listen to your security team," the man said, as he stood up and walked our way, voice smooth, almost lazy, like nothing about tonight surprised him. "They know how to handle strays." That word cut deeper than the guard's fingers digging into my hoodie, because I've heard it my whole life, just not always out loud. Stray, problem, trash, all different ways of saying, "You don't belong here." I stepped half in front of Nolan without even thinking, like my 90-pound, half-starved body was going to stop a professional killer or something, and pointed at the guy, hand shaking, but I didn't drop it. "He was in the kitchen," I said. "He had the bottle. If you eat that, you die." And my voice cracked on the last word. Rich people at nearby tables were actually staring now, some with curiosity, some with horror, some honestly annoyed like I was ruining their night out. The man in black looked me up and down, then looked at the plate, then at Nolan, and his smile thinned, like he hadn't planned on me being part of the equation. "You really going to take her word over your chef's?" he asked, almost amused. Nolan didn't flinch, and in that moment I realized you're not that rich by accident. His brain was doing math way faster than mine. "Carter," he said, still looking at the stranger, "take this plate to the lab, don't make a scene." And one of his security guys stepped in, lifted the salad like it was a bomb, and disappeared inside. The man in black's jaw ticked just a little, not much, but enough for me to see I hadn't imagined any of this. "You just insulted a 5-star kitchen," he said. "If they survive the test, I'll send flowers," Nolan replied. "If they don't, I'll send lawyers." And a couple of people laughed nervously, like maybe this was some weird rich guy joke, but my heart was still slamming against my ribs. The man in black gave Nolan a last look, glanced at me like he was memorizing my face, then said, "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Cross," in a tone that made it sound like a threat, and walked away into the crowd. He didn't look back, which somehow made it worse. When he was gone, the noise on the rooftop slowly came back. Music picking up again, clinking glasses, whispers, phones recording. Because of course people had their cameras out. But in my little bubble it was just me and this billionaire I had pretty much assaulted in public. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, and it threw me because I was expecting, "Get her out of here," or "Call the cops," or I'm pressing charges. Not that. Rena, I said, voice small now that the adrenaline was fading, Rena Cole. He repeated it like he was trying it on, then pulled out the chair next to him and nodded. Sit, Rena, he said. Tonight you're my guest. And you should have seen the looks the people around us gave him when a kid in a ripped hoodie sat down at his table with shaking hands. They brought me food. Real food. Hot chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables that weren't from a can. And my stomach growled so loud I wanted to disappear. But when I hesitated, eyeing the plate like it might bite me back, he said quietly, Nobody touches what comes to this table without going through my people first. You can eat. And so I did fast, at first, then slower, when I realized nobody was going to yank it away. Between bites, he asked me where I stayed, and the words just kind of spilled out. The underpass, the other kids, the guy who talks to pigeons more than people, the way cops only care about us when we make tourists uncomfortable. The way school stopped making sense when there was no address to put on the forms. And I didn't look at his face while I talked, because it's easier to tell the truth when you're staring at your plate, you know what I mean? When he asked about my parents, I told him my mom got sick and never got better. And my dad took the last of our cash one morning and said he was going to fix things. Then never came back. And I tried to say it like a joke, like, yeah, that happened. But my voice gave me away. His jaw clenched in a way that had nothing to do with business or money, and he said, I'm sorry. In this voice that did not sound like a rich guy just saying the polite thing, it sounded like someone who knew what empty chairs at the table felt like. Before I could figure out what to do with that, his head of security, Carter, came back to the table, leaned in and said, We picked up that guy in black again 2 blocks down, trailing one of your cars. And just like that, the nice little bubble of warm food and kind eyes popped. Nolan stood up so smoothly, the table barely rattled, dropped a stack of bills that would have fed me for months, and said to me, You're coming with me, like it was a fact, not a question. Everything inside me wanted to run again. Run from the danger. Run from the attention. Run from being seen. And I told him, Look, I'm just making things worse. If he knows I warned you, he'll go after me, and you don't need that. Because nobody ever needs a kid like me. They just tolerate us until we disappear. He shook his head like I'd said something offensive. If I let you walk back onto the street after this, he said, voice low but fierce. Knowing a man like that has your face in his head, that makes me worse than him, and I'm not going to be that guy. And you could tell he meant it. So that's how I ended up in the back of a Rolls-Royce, Nolan beside me, Carter in the front, the city sliding by in streaks of light, while my brain tried to process the fact that a few hours ago I was hunting for crusts of pizza, and now I was in a car that probably cost more than every building on my block combined. We hadn't even cleared downtown when Carter said, We've got a tail. And sure enough, when I twisted around, there was a motorcycle back there, one headlight, black helmet, black jacket, creeping closer every time we turned. It's him, I whispered, because even from that distance I felt that same heavy, focused stare, and my heart kicked into overdrive. The driver took a hard turn toward the tunnel. Nolan leaned forward and told him, Bring in the switch, and I had no idea what that meant, until we dropped into this long concrete tunnel, lights strobing overhead, engine noise bouncing off the walls, and suddenly another black SUV slid into view ahead of us, like it had been waiting. Our driver stomped the brakes, my seatbelt dug into my collarbone. Doors flew open on both vehicles at the same time, and Carter shouted, Move! Grabbing my hand as we ran from one car to the other in the middle of that echoing tunnel, my shoes barely gripping the polished concrete. We dove into the SUV doors, slammed engines, swapped places. The rolls eased forward. The bike gunned past after the wrong car, and in the side mirror, I watched that man chase what he thought was us until the tunnel swallowed them both. That's the moment the fear shifted inside me, turned into something else, something hotter. Anger that people like that think we're just pieces on a board. Anger that if I had died back there, the story would have been unidentified juvenile found, and nobody would connect it to the billionaire whose dinner got spiked. Anger that the world believes men in suits over kids in hoodies by default. By the time we reached his estate, which by the way was not a house but a small kingdom behind iron gates with fountains and manicured lawns and more guards than I'd seen in my whole life put together, I was exhausted, wired, hungry again, and still somehow more afraid for him than myself. Inside, he didn't parade me through the big marble foyer for show. He waved off the staff and took me to a smaller room, with a fireplace, told the housekeeper to get me clothes and a bed. And when I whispered that I'd never had a room to myself before, he just looked like something sharp had lodged in his chest. While I was showering off what felt like years of dirt, the lab called, and when I came back down, hair still damp, hoodie borrowed. Carter told us the results straight out, that salad had enough slow-acting poison on it to stop Nolan's heart before his next flight landed. I sat down hard when I heard that, because suddenly all the little choices I'd made that night lined up in my head. Turning toward the door instead of away, shoving my way onto that rooftop, opening my mouth, when every survival instinct told me to keep quiet. And I realized if I had hesitated even 5 more minutes, it would have been too late. Nolan looked at me like he was seeing me for real, not just as some half-starved kid who crashed his dinner, and he said very simply, "I owe you my life." And that hit different than any thank you I've ever gotten. He asked me why I came back, why I risked it, and all I could tell him was the truth. That I was tired of being a shadow, that I didn't want to be the kind of person who watches a guy get killed because, hey, not my problem. That I thought maybe if I saved someone, maybe my existence mattered to more than just me. He listened to all of that, really listened, then told me about his daughter Lily, how she died in an accident when she was little. How after that, he started treating people like numbers, because numbers don't die on you. They just move columns on a spreadsheet. And as messed up as it sounds, I understood that more than I expected. Because when the world keeps hurting you, you start putting distance between you and everything that might make you feel. The twist came later, when the security team dug through footage from the restaurant and the streets and pulled up a frame that made Nolan go quiet. Not the man in black we already knew about him. His name turned out to be Mason, some high-priced mercenary. What really made the room colder was the other face they found in the crowd, half hidden in a hat, watching everything. Someone the company software recognized in a heartbeat. Damon Klein, Nolan's former partner, the guy who used to stand next to him in magazine photos and then sued him in real life, the man with enough grudge and money to hire someone like Mason without blinking. When Carter handed Nolan his phone with the latest message, no words, just a photo, me on the rooftop, gripping Nolan's wrist, him looking at me instead of the plate, I realized Damon wasn't just trying to erase a rival. He'd noticed the stray who ruined his plan, and that scared me more than anything. Nolan called the number back against Carter's advice, and I stood there listening to this smooth voice say, "Congratulations, you survived dinner," and Nolan saying, "You failed," and Damon laughing softly and saying, "Did I or did I just learn how soft you've gotten?" And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one being threatened, but I felt every word in my bones. When Damon called me a stray again, like I was just some piece of trash Nolan dragged in off the sidewalk, I waited for the usual, for the powerful guy to distance himself to say, "She's not my problem." But instead, Nolan said, "You come after her, that's war." In this voice that did not sound like a metaphor, and something in me shifted for good. I won't lie, there was a part of me that wanted to run, to disappear, before Damon could put a bullet or a knife or a car in my path, because that's what life teaches you when no one has your back. you save yourself. But standing there in that expensive study in clean clothes that actually fit with a man who should have gone home in a body bag because of a salad, now promising to protect me like his own, I realized walking away wouldn't just be about survival. It would be about going back to being invisible. And I was done with that. So here we are. A billionaire who finally had to admit his money couldn't protect him from everything. A homeless girl who proved the world wrong just by yelling, "Don't eat that," at the right moment. And a very angry, very rich enemy out there who now knows both our faces. I'm not going to pretend this turned into some perfect fairy tale overnight. I still flinch when I hear motorcycles behind us. He still wakes up at 3 a.m., checking the security feeds. But I can tell you this, that night changed the math of my life. I went from a ghost under a bridge to someone whose words literally kept a heart beating. And it made me ask myself some hard questions about how often we ignore the kids on the corner. The woman outside the store. The guy with the cardboard sign, who might see things no one else is looking at. So if you were sitting at that rooftop table watching a dirty, shaking kid slap a fork out of a billionaire's hand and scream about poison, be honest. Would you believe her? Or would you roll your eyes and wait for security to drag her away? Would you think she's crazy, or maybe I should listen for 10 seconds? And which one of those choices do you feel good about when you imagine how that story ends? Tell me in the comments what you think. Is it worse to be the person everyone underestimates until you finally snap and fight back, or the powerful one who almost dies because you never once thought the stray at your table might be the only honest voice in the room? And if you ever hear a kid like me whisper, "Don't eat that," I hope you at least pause long enough to ask why.